3 weeks before my wedding, I discovered that the woman I loved had been lying to me about something so important that it made me question whether I had ever known her at all. The worst part? The lie wasn't about another man. It wasn't about money. It was about her parents. And when I finally found them, sitting inside a small house almost 2 hours away, they looked at me like I was the first person who had remembered they existed. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 37 years old, and I run a commercial property company outside Detroit. For most of my adult life, I thought I understood people pretty well. Business had taught me how to read hesitation, recognize a bad deal, and notice when someone was hiding something behind a smile. But apparently, I was terrible at recognizing lies when the person telling them was the woman I planned to spend the rest of my life with. Her name was Lauren. We had been together for a little over a year, and for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely happy. Lauren was smart, funny, polished, and incredibly easy to love. She knew exactly when to make me laugh. She remembered small things I mentioned weeks earlier. She could walk into a room full of strangers and somehow make everyone feel like they'd known her for years. My family loved her almost immediately, and my family was not exactly easy to impress. My father, Marcus, had built our company from the ground up. My mother, Diane, was the kind of woman who believed Sunday dinner was sacred. My Uncle Ray lived nearby and appeared at our house whenever he felt like it, usually without calling first. We were loud. We argued. We laughed too much. And when we loved someone, we pulled them into the family completely. Lauren fit right in. By our 3rd month together, she was sitting beside my mother at Sunday dinner, learning one of her recipes. By the 6th month, Uncle Ray had given her his unofficial approval. And after 11 months, I proposed. She said yes before I had even finished the question. I still remember the way she looked at me that night. Her eyes filled with tears. She hugged me so tightly that for a few seconds, I forgot everything else existed. I believed that was the beginning of the best chapter of my life. I had no idea it was actually the beginning of the end, because Lauren had always told me one thing about her family. She said they were toxic. She said her parents had spent years criticizing her, controlling her, and making her feel like she could never become the person she wanted to be. So she had cut them out. No calls. No visits. No wedding invitation. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? When someone you love tells you about the wounds they carry, you don't immediately search for evidence against them. You listen. You comfort them. You trust them. But my father wasn't convinced. One Sunday night, after Lauren left our house, he pulled me aside. He didn't accuse her of anything. He simply said something that stayed with me. Adrian, before you marry someone, you should know what kind of story they're running from. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. I told him Lauren had been hurt. He nodded. Then he asked one question. Then why have you never met the people who supposedly hurt her? I didn't have an answer. Still, I pushed the thought aside. Until a few weeks later, something completely ordinary exposed a detail Lauren had apparently forgotten to hide. And that tiny detail led me to an address. An address she had never given me. The next Saturday morning, I drove nearly 2 hours north. I thought I was going there to meet the parents Lauren had warned me about. I thought I might finally understand why she had cut them off. Instead, when an older man opened the front door and heard my name, his face completely collapsed. Not with anger, not with fear, with something much worse, relief. And when he whispered, "You came because of Lauren?" I realized I wasn't standing in front of strangers. I was standing in front of 2 people who had been waiting for their daughter to come home. And suddenly, I understood one terrifying truth. Lauren hadn't been telling me her family's story. She had been telling me a story about her family. And those were not the same thing. But what I found inside that little house was only the first piece of a lie that was about to destroy my wedding, and expose exactly why Lauren had erased the people who loved her most. The man standing in front of me looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. He was probably in his late 60s, wearing an old baseball shirt and holding a garden hose. Water was running across the driveway, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes stayed fixed on me. "You're Adrian." It wasn't a question. I swallowed. "Yes, sir. Adrian Cole. I'm engaged to Lauren." The hose slipped from his hand. It hit the concrete, and water sprayed across his shoes. Then he turned toward the house. "Elaine!" His voice cracked. "Elaine, come outside." A woman appeared behind the screen door almost immediately. She was smaller than I expected. Gray hair. Simple sweater. Nervous eyes. She looked at me. Then she looked at her husband. And suddenly she covered her mouth. Neither of them asked me to leave. Neither demanded to know why I was there. Instead, Elaine whispered something that made my stomach tighten. Did she finally send you? I stared at her. Send me? Her face changed. Not confusion. Pain. Real pain. The kind that doesn't need to be explained, because you can see how long it has been living there. I stepped inside. Their home was nothing like the world Lauren had described. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't impressive. There were no expensive paintings or designer furniture. It was simply warm. There were family photographs everywhere. And then I saw her. Lauren. Not the Lauren I knew. A younger Lauren. Maybe 17. She was standing between the two people in front of me, smiling so widely that I barely recognized her. There were pictures from school. Birthday parties. Graduation. A family vacation. Her father had an arm around her in almost every photograph. Her mother appeared beside her in nearly all the others. I walked toward one picture without realizing it. Lauren was wearing a graduation cap. Her father stood behind her with tears in his eyes. The man who supposedly had been cruel and controlling looked like a father who couldn't believe his little girl had grown up. She doesn't talk about us, does she? Elaine asked. I turned around. I didn't know how to answer. Finally, I said, she told me you were toxic. Elaine looked down. Her husband closed his eyes. And for several seconds, neither spoke. Then he quietly said, I guess that's easier than telling you what really happened. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. We sat around their kitchen table. The same kind of table where ordinary families talk about bills, birthdays, work, and dinner. Elaine brought coffee, even though I hadn't asked for any. Her hands were shaking. And slowly the story came out. They had never abandoned Lauren. They hadn't thrown her out. They hadn't refused to support her career. In fact, they had spent years helping her. Her father had worked nearly 3 decades in municipal maintenance before retiring. Her mother had been a school office administrator. They weren't wealthy, but they had saved carefully. They helped Lauren through college. They paid what they could. They celebrated every achievement. Then Lauren moved to the city, and everything changed. At first, the calls simply became shorter. Then the visits became less frequent. Then she stopped telling them about her life. She began using a different surname socially. She stopped posting photographs with them. Eventually, she stopped answering altogether. I stared at them. Why? Her father looked toward the window. She wanted a different life. I couldn't stop thinking about that. A different life. Then Elaine reached into a drawer. She pulled out an envelope. It had been opened. Inside was a bank statement and a handwritten note. Her father pushed it toward me. She asked us for money. How much? He hesitated. $35,000. My chest tightened. For what? Her wedding. I looked at him. That amount was significant, but it wasn't the part that disturbed me. What happened? He gave a tired smile. We told her we could help with $8,000. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. We told her we'd give everything we could afford without putting our retirement at risk. I looked between them. And she refused? Elaine nodded. Then she said something I will never forget. She told us that if we couldn't help her have the wedding she wanted, then maybe we didn't deserve to be part of it. Silence filled the kitchen. I looked down at the envelope. $8,000. That was all they could safely give. And for that, their daughter had erased them. But then Elaine reached into another drawer. This time she pulled out a stack of envelopes. Birthday cards. Christmas cards. Letters. All returned. Unopened. My throat tightened. She sent those back? Elaine nodded. Every one. Then she pushed one toward me. It was a birthday card addressed to Lauren. The return label had been crossed out. Someone had written a new address over it. My address. My apartment. My heart started pounding. Why is my address on this? Elaine looked at me. We don't know. I stared at the envelope. Then I remembered something. Lauren had texted me the previous night. She had sounded excited. She said her parents had finally apologized. She said they wanted to meet me. She said she couldn't wait for me to finally have them in my life. I slowly pulled out my phone. I opened the message. Then I turned the screen toward Elaine and her husband. Their faces changed as they read it. Her father didn't move. Her mother simply whispered, "No." I asked, "What?" She pointed at the phone. "Adrian, we never contacted her." The room seemed to shrink. I read Lauren's message again. Then again. And suddenly, I understood something much worse. She wasn't planning to introduce me to her real parents. She had already found replacements. And if she had gone this far just to protect the image she had built, I had to know who those replacements were. So I asked her father one question. Who does Lauren want me to meet? He looked at me, and the answer he gave made my blood run cold. That's what scares me, because apparently, Lauren hadn't just invented a fake story about her parents. She had already convinced two completely different people to play the roles, and they were supposed to meet me in less than a week. I drove back to Detroit with one thought repeating in my head. Who were the two people Lauren had convinced to pretend they were her parents? The question should have made me furious. Instead, it made me sad, because sitting across from Harold and Elaine, looking at those unopened birthday cards, I had finally understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. Lauren hadn't simply lied to me. She had built an entire version of herself that required other people to disappear. And somehow, I had become the next person expected to protect that version. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted the truth before I gave her a chance to create another explanation. My father had always taught me that. Never accuse someone while you only have half the story. So I went home, kissed Lauren on the forehead, and acted like everything was normal. She was sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open. When she looked up, she smiled. How was your morning? I almost laughed. Instead, I said, long. She closed her laptop. Did you get everything handled? Yeah. She leaned toward me. Good. Because Saturday is going to be perfect. There was something about the way she said it. Not hopeful. Certain. Like the outcome had already been decided. I smiled. Who are we meeting again? For the smallest fraction of a second, her expression changed. Then it was gone. My parents. I watched her carefully. The ones who apologized? Yes. What are their names? She stared at me. Only for a second. But it was enough. Then she smiled. Robert and Victoria. Robert and Victoria. I repeated the names in my head. I didn't ask anything else. Later that evening, after Lauren went to bed, I sat alone in my office. I searched the names, and there they were. Robert Mercer. Victoria Mercer. Successful. Well-connected. Older than Lauren. They appeared in charity photographs, business events, fundraising dinners, and corporate announcements. Exactly the kind of couple Lauren's new social circle would admire. And then I found the connection. Robert was a senior executive at the financial company where Lauren worked. My stomach tightened. This wasn't random. She hadn't found two strangers. She had found people who could fit perfectly into the life she had constructed. I sat back in my chair. Then I noticed something else. Lauren had started mentioning Robert more often over the previous few weeks. At first, it seemed harmless. Robert helped me with that account. Victoria recommended this restaurant. Robert thinks the market is going to change. Small comments. Almost invisible. But now I could see what she'd been doing. She had been introducing their names into my world slowly, making them familiar before she needed me to accept them as something they weren't. I felt sick, not because of Robert and Victoria, because I remembered how Lauren had looked when she told me her parents were finally coming back into her life. She had hugged me. She had cried. She had said, I finally get to give you the family I should have introduced you to. And I had believed every word. The next morning, I called my father. He answered immediately. What happened? How do you know something happened? You're calling me before breakfast. I was quiet. Then I said, I found Lauren's parents. Silence. My father's voice changed. Are they okay? Yes. Then what's wrong? I told him everything. The cards. The money. The story Lauren had told me. And Robert and Victoria. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. What are you going to do? I don't know. Yes, you do. I looked through my office window. Cars moved along the street below. People were going to work, buying coffee, starting ordinary mornings. And I was sitting there wondering whether the woman I planned to marry had ever loved me enough to tell me the truth. I want to meet them, I said. My father understood immediately. Then meet them. That Saturday, I went to the restaurant alone. Robert and Victoria arrived together. The moment Lauren saw them, her entire face changed. She looked happier than I'd seen her in weeks. She rushed toward Victoria and hugged her. Mom. Victoria hugged her back. Sweetheart. Then Lauren turned toward Robert. Dad. He smiled. And I watched the performance begin. Robert shook my hand. Adrian. It's wonderful to finally meet you. Likewise. Victoria touched my arm. We've heard so much about you. I'm sure she had. Just not from the people whose names were on Lauren's birth certificate. We sat down. For 20 minutes, everything looked perfect. They talked about Lauren's childhood. except the details were vague. A school memory here, a family vacation there, a favorite restaurant. Nothing specific enough to expose them. Lauren filled in the gaps whenever necessary. She was incredible at it, almost too incredible. And that was when I realized something terrifying. She had rehearsed this. Every smile, every story, every emotional detail. She had prepared these people for questions I hadn't even asked. Then Robert leaned toward me. Lauren has always wanted a family that could support the life she's building. I looked at him. There was something strange in the sentence. Not, we're proud of her. Not, she's always been ambitious. Support the life she's building. I glanced at Lauren. She was watching me, waiting. So I smiled, and I gave her exactly what she wanted. Then I'd love to have both of you at our engagement dinner next weekend. Lauren's eyes lit up. Victoria accepted immediately. Robert followed, and beneath the table Lauren squeezed my hand. She thought she had won. She thought the lie had survived. But I had already made my decision. The dinner would happen. Only it wouldn't be the celebration Lauren expected. Because I was going to invite 2 more people. 2 people she believed would never appear. 2 people who had spent years waiting for their daughter to remember them. And when they walked through that restaurant door, Lauren would have nowhere left to hide. The only question was whether she would break when she saw them, or whether she would try to lie one final time. The moment Lauren agreed to the engagement dinner, I knew the hardest part was no longer discovering the truth. It was keeping my heart from breaking before the truth had a chance to finish. Because I still loved her. That was the part nobody tells you about betrayal. You don't stop loving someone the second you discover what they've done. Sometimes you love them even more painfully. You remember the woman who held you when you were sick. The person who knew exactly how you took your coffee. The voice that once made an ordinary Tuesday feel like something worth remembering. And then you discover that same person has been lying to you. Your mind says, walk away. Your heart keeps asking, but what if there's an explanation? I had to silence that question, at least until the dinner. The next morning, I drove back to Harold and Elaine's house. This time, Harold opened the door before I even knocked. He looked surprised. You came back. I need to ask you something. He stepped aside. Elaine was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a mug between both hands. I sat across from her. I invited you to an engagement dinner. Elaine's eyes immediately dropped. No, I hadn't expected that. Why? Because she's going to hate us. Her voice broke on the last word. I leaned forward. Elaine, she already chose to erase you. Her eyes filled. She's still our daughter. That sentence almost destroyed me. There was no anger in it. No bitterness. Just love. The kind of love that remains even after someone has stopped giving you reasons to keep it. I said, that's exactly why you need to be there. Harold stared at me. Adrian, we don't want to humiliate her. I'm not trying to humiliate her. Then what are you trying to do? I looked at both of them. Give you your place back. Elaine began crying quietly. I continued. My family is going to be there. The people Lauren says are her parents will be there. Everyone will be sitting at the same table. Harold's jaw tightened. And you want us to walk in? Yes. He looked at Elaine. She looked back at him. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Harold reached across the table and took her hand. Then he looked at me. What time? That was all. I almost couldn't answer. 7. He nodded. We'll be there. On the drive back to Detroit, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Relief. For the first time, Harold and Elaine weren't waiting helplessly for Lauren to decide whether they deserved to exist. They had a seat at the table, and I was going to make sure nobody took it away. That afternoon, I went to see my parents. My father listened quietly while I explained everything. My mother wasn't nearly as calm. When I finished, she stood up from the kitchen counter. She told you those people were her parents? Yes. And she knew you were going to marry her? Yes. My mother stared at me. Then she said something I'll never forget. Adrian, a person can be ashamed of where they came from, but they should never be ashamed of the people who sacrificed everything so they could get somewhere. My father nodded. Your mother is right. Then he looked at me. What do you want from this dinner? I knew immediately. The truth. He shook his head. No. I looked at him. Then what? Truth doesn't need you to force it. He leaned forward. Let them speak. Let Lauren speak. Let everyone hear what they've been told. You don't need to destroy her. I understood. My father wasn't asking me to protect Lauren. He was asking me to protect myself from becoming someone I wouldn't recognize afterward. So we planned the evening carefully. My parents would host. My Uncle Raymond would attend. Robert and Victoria would arrive with Lauren. Harold and Elaine would come through a separate entrance after everyone was seated. Nobody would confront Lauren beforehand. Nobody would warn her. Nobody would insult her. The truth would simply walk into the room. And Lauren wouldn't be able to edit it. The next several days were strange. She became even more affectionate. She talked constantly about the wedding, the venue, the guest list, the flowers, the honeymoon. She even started showing me photographs of dresses. Sometimes she would rest her head against my shoulder while we looked at them together. And every time she did, something inside me cracked a little more. One evening, she asked me, "Are you happy?" I looked at her. She seemed genuinely worried. For 1 second, I almost told her everything. I almost said, "I know." But then I remembered Elaine holding that unopened birthday card. I remembered Harold saying he had been prepared for years to see his daughter again. And I remembered that Lauren wasn't just lying to me. She was about to stand in front of both families and make another lie real. So I smiled. "I'm happy." Lauren kissed me. Then she whispered, "This is finally becoming the life I've always wanted." I closed my eyes. That sentence stayed with me, because I suddenly understood. She wasn't trying to build a life with me. She was trying to build a life that looked impressive enough to make her old life disappear. And I had been helping her do it. The night before the dinner, I stood in my bedroom while Lauren slept beside me. The engagement ring was still on her finger. I stared at it for a long time. That ring had once represented everything I believed was permanent. Now it felt like a question. I quietly reached into my jacket and touched the small box inside. I had already made my decision. But Lauren didn't know it yet. The next evening, everyone would sit at one table. Her carefully chosen parents, my real family, and the two people she had spent years pretending no longer existed. I knew Harold and Elaine would walk through that door. What I didn't know was what Lauren would do when she saw them. Because there was one thing even I hadn't anticipated. Lauren had prepared a story for their disappearance. And apparently, she had already told Robert and Victoria exactly what they were supposed to believe. So when the doors opened, I wasn't sure whether the first person to break down would be Lauren, or the two people she had recruited to help her lie. The night of the engagement dinner, Lauren spent nearly 3 hours getting ready. I watched her from the living room while she moved between the bedroom mirror and closet, changing earrings, checking her hair, adjusting the dress she had chosen days earlier. She looked beautiful. That was the cruelest part. I still saw the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman who had once fallen asleep against my chest during a thunderstorm. The woman who knew exactly when I needed silence and exactly when I needed someone to make me laugh. For a few minutes, I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Then I remembered Harold and Elaine. The birthday cards, the photographs, the way Harold's voice had changed when he talked about his daughter. And the doubt disappeared. Lauren finally walked into the living room. "Well," I looked at her. "You look beautiful." She smiled. "Are you nervous?" "A little." She came closer and straightened my collar. "You don't have to be." I almost asked her why. Why wasn't she nervous? Why did she seem so completely certain that tonight would go exactly according to plan? Instead, I said, "You're right." She kissed me. Then she left for the restaurant ahead of me. She wanted to make sure everything was perfect. I told her I'd follow shortly. The moment the door closed behind her, I stood completely still. Then I called Harold. He answered on the first ring. "Adrian, are you ready?" There was a long silence. Then he said, "We're outside." My heart tightened. "Don't come in yet." "Okay. When I text you, walk through the main entrance." Another pause. "Will she know we're coming?" I looked toward the closed door. "No." Harold exhaled. "Good." His voice changed. Not angry. Just wounded. "I don't know what I'm going to say." "You don't have to say anything." "What if she hates us?" I closed my eyes. "Harold, she already thinks you're gone. Tonight, she gets to see that you never were." He didn't answer. Then Elaine spoke somewhere beside him. "We'll be there." The call ended. I stood there for another moment. Then I picked up my jacket. The restaurant was already buzzing when I arrived. My mother had arranged everything personally. The room was elegant but warm. No giant decorations. No ridiculous display. Just a long table, soft lighting, flowers, and enough space for everyone to see each other. My father stood near the entrance. He looked at me. One glance. That was enough. "Ready?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "Good." I looked at him. He almost smiled. Anyone who tells you they're ready for something like this is lying. Then he put a hand on my shoulder. Just tell the truth. At 7, Lauren arrived. I heard her laughing before she entered the room. That laugh. I knew it immediately. It was slightly brighter than her natural laugh. The laugh she used when she wanted everyone around her to feel that something wonderful was happening. She walked in wearing a dark blue dress. Robert and Victoria followed. Lauren looked around the room. Then she saw me. Her entire face brightened. She crossed the room and wrapped both arms around me. This is perfect. I held her. Is it? She pulled back. What? I smiled. Nothing. She kissed my cheek. Then she introduced Robert and Victoria to my parents again. Everyone shook hands. Everyone smiled. Everyone pretended. We sat down. For the first half hour, it looked like an ordinary engagement dinner. Food arrived. Wine was poured. My mother asked Victoria about her work. Robert talked with my father about business. Lauren laughed at all the right moments. She seemed completely relaxed, almost victorious. I watched her carefully. She kept glancing around the room, taking in the people, the table, the setting, the family she had wanted me to believe she had. Then she leaned toward me. Adrian. Yeah. Thank you. For what? She smiled. For giving me this. I looked at her. She seemed emotional, genuinely emotional. And for one painful second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she whispered, I've spent my whole life wishing my family could look like this. That sentence cut deeper than she could have known. Because somewhere outside that room, her actual parents were waiting. The people who had paid her college bills. The people whose birthday cards she had returned. The people who had spent years hoping she would call. And she was sitting beside me, looking at strangers, wishing they were family. I lowered my eyes. You're going to get what you deserve tonight. She smiled. She thought I was talking about happiness. I wasn't. Dinner continued. 7:30, 7:40, 7:50. I kept my phone inside my jacket. Then I felt it vibrate. One message. Harold. We're here. My heart began pounding. I didn't move. I waited. Lauren was talking to Victoria. Robert was telling my father some story. My mother was laughing politely. Everything looked normal. That was when I realized something. The most terrifying moments don't always feel terrifying. Sometimes they feel ordinary. A room full of people eating dinner. A woman you love sitting beside you. A phone vibrating inside your pocket. And a truth waiting just outside the door. I looked at the clock. 8:03. I knew it was time. I stood. Lauren looked up. Where are you going? I reached for my glass. Nowhere. I tapped my spoon lightly against it. The room quieted. Lauren smiled. She thought I was about to give a romantic toast. Her eyes softened. I looked around the table. Then I said, before I say anything about our future, there's something everyone here needs to know about our past. Lauren's smile disappeared. Just slightly. I continued. Because tonight, I want the right people sitting at this table. Her eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time that entire evening, I saw fear. I turned toward the restaurant manager. He gave me one small nod. Then he walked toward the door behind Lauren. She followed his movement. Her face changed. Adrian? I didn't answer. The door opened, and Harold walked in. Elaine was beside him. For 1 second, Lauren didn't recognize them. Then she did. Her entire body froze. The color drained from her face. Her hand slipped from the edge of the table, and Robert and Victoria turned toward the doorway. I watched their expressions change too, because whatever Lauren had told them about her parents, they had never expected those parents to walk into the room. Elaine's eyes found her daughter. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse her. She simply whispered, Lauren. And somehow, that single word hurt more than anything else could have. Lauren looked at me, then at them, then back at me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She had spent years preparing for questions, preparing stories, preparing excuses. But she hadn't prepared for the one thing she couldn't control. Her parents standing alive and heartbroken in the same room. I stepped away from the table. And then Lauren finally spoke. Adrian, what did you do? I stared at her. And my answer was quiet. I didn't do anything. I pointed toward Harold and Elaine. They did. Her eyes filled with panic. And then Robert suddenly stood up. He looked at Lauren, then at the couple in the doorway. His face had gone completely pale. Lauren, he swallowed. What is going on? She turned toward him. And in that instant, I knew the next lie was coming. because Lauren had survived this long by never letting anyone else tell the story first. But this time, her real parents were already in the room. Lauren stared at me like I had suddenly become a stranger. Then she turned toward Harold and Elaine. Her mother was crying. Her father wasn't. That somehow made it worse. He simply stood there with his shoulders straight, looking at his daughter with the expression of a man who had spent years imagining this moment and still wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Lauren finally looked at Robert. "Dad, please." Robert's face tightened. "Don't call me that." The room went silent. Lauren's mouth fell open. Victoria looked at Robert, then at Lauren. "What is happening?" Lauren shook her head quickly. "This isn't what it looks like." I almost closed my eyes. That sentence, the oldest sentence in the world, the one people use when the truth is already standing in the room. Harold finally spoke. "Lauren, we didn't come here to embarrass you." She turned toward him. "Then why are you here?" His face changed. For a moment, he looked less like an angry father and more like the man in the old graduation photograph. The man who had once carried his daughter on his shoulders. "Because he invited us." Lauren looked at me. "You had no right." My chest tightened. "No right?" She stepped toward me. "You had no right to go looking for them." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because they're my past." Her voice cracked. "And I left that behind." Elaine wiped her cheeks. "We didn't leave you behind." Lauren spun toward her. "You don't understand." "I understand that you stopped answering. Because you never understood me." Her mother flinched. That tiny movement nearly broke me. I stepped forward. "Lauren." She looked at me. I kept my voice low. "You told me they abused you." Her eyes shifted. "You don't know everything." "Then tell me." She said nothing. I continued. "You told me they controlled you. You told me they made you feel worthless. You told me they refused to support you." Harold looked down. I turned toward him. "Is any of that true?" He shook his head. "Not the way she told it." Lauren immediately interrupted. "Because you don't know what it was like." Harold's voice remained calm. "I know exactly what it was like." He looked at his daughter. "I was there." That silenced her. Then I reached into my jacket. I pulled out my phone. I went to their house. Lauren's face went pale. "I saw your photographs." Her lips parted. "I saw your graduation picture." She looked away. "I saw the birthday cards they sent you." Her eyes returned to mine. "And I saw every one you sent back." Elaine began crying again. Lauren's voice dropped. "Adrian." "No." I shook my head. "Let me finish." For the first time, she didn't interrupt. I looked around the table. "My family has spent weeks preparing for a wedding. Your parents have spent years wondering why their daughter stopped speaking to them. And Robert and Victoria were brought into this because you needed someone else to occupy their places." Victoria's face had gone completely still. Robert slowly turned toward Lauren. "You told us they were dead." Lauren closed her eyes. I heard my mother inhale sharply. Victoria whispered, "You said your parents had died years ago." Lauren opened her eyes. I was going to explain. Robert stared at her. "When?" She couldn't answer. Victoria's voice was softer. "Lauren, we agreed to help you because you told us your family was gone." Lauren shook her head. "I didn't mean. You used us." Robert's voice was quiet now. Not angry. Disappointed. And somehow, that seemed to affect Lauren more than shouting would have. She looked at me. "You don't understand why I did it." "Then make me understand." Her face crumpled. And for the first time, the polished woman I knew disappeared. "I was tired." Nobody moved. She continued. "I was tired of being embarrassed." Her eyes went toward Harold. "Do you know what it felt like telling people my father worked maintenance? Do you know what it felt like watching everyone around me have parents with important jobs and expensive houses?" Harold's eyes filled. "I worked every hour I could so you could have a better life." "I know." Lauren screamed it. Then she covered her mouth. The room fell silent again. She began crying. "I know." Her voice was barely audible. "I know what you did." Harold swallowed. "Then why?" Lauren looked at him. And for 1 second, she looked like the frightened teenager in those photographs. "Because I thought if I became someone important enough, nobody would ever look down on me again." My heart sank. There it was. Not an excuse. Not forgiveness. But finally the truth. Lauren hadn't erased her parents because they were cruel. She had erased them because she was ashamed of where she came from. And somewhere along the way, she had become more afraid of looking ordinary than she was afraid of losing the people who loved her. I looked at the engagement ring on her finger. Then at the woman I had planned to marry. "You should have told me." She cried harder. I was afraid you'd see me differently. I shook my head. I do see you differently. Her face collapsed. But not because your father worked maintenance. I looked at Harold. Not because your mother worked in a school. Then I looked back at Lauren. I see you differently because you looked at two people who gave you everything they could and decided they weren't good enough to stand beside you. Lauren lowered her head. And then I did something that hurt me more than I expected. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the ring box, and placed it on the table. Lauren stared at it. She knew. Everyone knew. I opened it. The diamond caught the light. For months, that ring had represented forever. Now it represented the moment I finally stopped pretending. Lauren whispered my name. I pushed the box toward her. I'm sorry. She looked at me through tears. Please don't. But I already knew. The wedding wasn't happening. The relationship wasn't surviving this. And yet, as I looked at Harold and Elaine, I realized ending my engagement wasn't the most important thing I had to do that night. There was still one person who had been carrying the deepest wound in that room. Elaine. I stood. I walked toward her. And when I reached her, I didn't say anything. I simply held out my hand. She stared at it, then at me. And when she finally took it, she broke down against my shoulder. Harold stepped beside her. His hand settled gently against her back. I looked over his shoulder at my father. He was watching me. Proud. Sad. And then he gave me one small nod. But I didn't know yet that what happened next would change the way both families saw that night forever. Because my mother had been silent through the entire confrontation. And now she was standing up, walking toward Elaine, with tears already filling her eyes. My mother crossed the room slowly. Elaine was still standing beside me, trying desperately to control her breathing. She had spent years imagining what it might feel like to see her daughter again. I don't think she ever imagined meeting her daughter's fiancé first. My mother stopped in front of her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then my mother opened her arms. Elaine stared at her. She looked confused, almost frightened, as if she couldn't understand why a stranger would offer comfort after everything that had happened. My mother simply said, "You don't have to stand alone anymore." Elaine broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Her knees nearly gave out, and my mother caught her. Elaine buried her face against her shoulder and started sobbing. I looked away. I couldn't watch. Because suddenly, I wasn't thinking about Lauren anymore. I was thinking about what it must feel like to send your child a birthday card and have it come back unopened. To see your daughter's life through photographs online. To know she's alive, successful, happy, and still feel like you no longer exist. Harold stood beside them. His eyes were wet, but he kept his composure. My father approached him. I saw Harold straighten instinctively. My father stopped a few feet away. "I'm Marcus Cole." Harold nodded. "I know who you are." My father glanced at me, then back at Harold. "I should have met you before tonight." Harold's expression softened. "None of this is your fault." My father shook his head. "Maybe not." Then he held out his hand. "But your daughter is going to be part of my family's story, whether she likes it or not." Harold looked at him, then at me, and finally, he took my father's hand. The handshake lasted longer than a normal introduction. Neither man said much. They didn't need to. Two fathers. Two completely different lives. But both understood the same thing. You can spend decades building something for your children. You can sacrifice money, sleep, opportunities, your own comfort. And sometimes, the person you did it all for doesn't understand the cost until much later. Harold's voice cracked. "Thank you for raising him right." My father's jaw tightened. He looked at me. Then he said, "I didn't do it alone. I nearly lost control. Because I knew what he meant. My mother, my grandfather, the whole family. The people who had taught me that someone's job didn't determine their value. Their house didn't determine their value. Their bank account didn't determine their value. How they treated people did." I turned toward Lauren. She was still sitting at the table. The engagement ring remained in the open box in front of her. Robert and Victoria hadn't moved. Victoria looked devastated. Robert looked like a man who had just discovered that someone he'd trusted had used his kindness as a costume. Lauren stared at her parents. For the first time all night, there was no performance. No polished smile. No carefully chosen story. She looked like a daughter. Just a daughter. And Harold finally walked toward her. Everyone became quiet. He stopped a few feet away. Lauren looked up. "Dad." He didn't answer immediately. She began crying. "I'm sorry." Harold's eyes closed. I saw him take a breath. Then another. He had waited years to hear those words. And now that they were finally spoken, he didn't look victorious. He looked exhausted. Why didn't you just tell us you were unhappy? Lauren shook her head. I was ashamed. Of us? She couldn't answer. Harold's face tightened. Then Lauren whispered. Of myself. That changed something. Not enough to repair everything, but enough to make the room breathe again. Harold crouched slightly, so they were closer to eye level. You never had to be ashamed of us. Lauren covered her face. I thought everyone would think I was nobody. Harold looked toward the photographs on the wall of the restaurant. Then back at his daughter. You were never nobody. His voice broke. You were our whole world. Lauren began sobbing. Harold didn't hug her. Not yet. And I understood why. Love doesn't erase consequences. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. Sometimes the person who hurt you has to sit with the damage before you decide whether they are allowed close enough to touch it. Elaine eventually stepped away from my mother. She wiped her face, then looked toward Lauren. Can I hug you? Lauren froze. That question destroyed whatever control she had left. She stood so quickly that her chair scraped against the floor. Mom! Elaine opened her arms. Lauren ran into them. The sound that came from Lauren wasn't the sound of a sophisticated woman losing an argument. It was the sound of a daughter finally collapsing into the arms of the mother she had spent years pretending she didn't need. Elaine held her. And despite everything Lauren had done, Elaine held her like she had been waiting for this exact moment since the day her daughter walked away. I watched them. My heart hurt, because I finally understood something painful. Sometimes people don't realize what they have destroyed until the people they hurt are standing directly in front of them. Robert quietly stood. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I shook my head. You didn't do anything. He glanced at Lauren. I should have asked more questions. She convinced you. His expression hardened. That doesn't make it right. Victoria approached me next. She touched my arm. Adrian, you deserve the truth before tonight. I know. She looked toward Lauren. Whatever happens between you two, I hope you understand something. What? She didn't lie because you weren't enough. I looked at her. Victoria continued. She lied because she thought she wasn't enough. That sentence stayed with me. Because maybe that was the tragedy underneath everything. Lauren had spent years trying to become someone impressive enough to escape her insecurity. And in doing so, she became someone capable of hurting the very people who had loved her before she had anything to prove. I walked toward the table. The ring was still sitting there. I picked up the box. Lauren looked at me. Her eyes were swollen. Are you really leaving? I wanted to say no. God, I wanted to. But love isn't always a reason to stay. Sometimes loving someone means admitting that what they did changed something you can't simply put back together. I can't marry you. She nodded slowly, as if some part of her already knew. But can we fix this? I looked toward Harold and Elaine. Then back at her. Maybe you can. She started crying again. But not tonight. I put the ring box into my pocket. Then I walked toward the door with my father beside me. Behind us, Lauren remained at the table. Her perfect dinner was over. Her carefully constructed family was gone. But her real parents were still there. And as I stepped outside into the cool night air, I thought the story was finished. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. Because the next morning, I received a message from Lauren. Only 6 words. And those 6 words made me turn around before I had even reached my car. You don't know the whole truth. You don't know the whole truth. I stared at Lauren's message for almost a minute. My first instinct was anger. My second was exhaustion. I had spent the entire night watching her carefully constructed life collapse in front of everyone. And now, instead of accepting what happened, she was telling me there was another secret. I finally typed back. Then tell me. Her response came almost immediately. Come to my apartment. Alone. I almost ignored it. Then I thought about Harold and Elaine. If there was another part of this story, they deserved to know too. So I drove back to the apartment we had shared. Lauren was sitting on the edge of the couch when I walked in. No makeup. No expensive dress. No carefully arranged smile. She looked tired. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked completely ordinary. And somehow that made me feel sad. She pointed toward the chair. Sit. I did. She stared at the floor. I lied about one thing you don't know. I waited. The money wasn't really about the wedding. My stomach tightened. What was it about? She swallowed. I owed money. I said nothing. She explained that over the previous year, she had accumulated debts trying to maintain the lifestyle she had built. Designer clothes. luxury events, trips, expensive dinners, things she couldn't comfortably afford, but believed she needed to belong. She had borrowed against accounts, used credit, moved money around, and eventually she reached a point where she needed help. That's why I asked my parents. I remembered Harold telling me about the $35,000 request. They offered you $8,000. She nodded. I was angry. Because it wasn't enough? Her eyes filled. Because they reminded me of who I really was. That answer hurt. But she continued. When they said they couldn't give me more, I felt humiliated. I thought if I admitted I was struggling, everything would come apart. She looked at me. So I made them the problem. I didn't respond. I told myself they were holding me back. I told myself they were embarrassing. And eventually I believed it. Her voice broke. Then I met you. I looked away. You had everything I wanted to pretend I already had. A successful business. A family that loved each other. People who didn't care about appearances. She wiped her eyes. And I was terrified that if you knew the real me, you'd leave. I finally said, Lauren, I would have helped you. She shook her head. That's the part one couldn't accept. Silence. Then she whispered something that nearly broke me. I didn't think I was worthy of the life you were offering me. I believed her. For the first time, I believed every word. But understanding someone doesn't erase what they did. I stood. Lauren, I hope someday you believe you're enough without pretending to be someone else. She looked up. But I can't be the man who teaches you that. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I know. I walked toward the door. Then stopped. Your parents are still waiting. She looked at me. What? Not for money. Not for an apology that fixes everything. They're waiting for their daughter to decide whether she wants to stop running. Lauren covered her face. I left. The next morning, I called Harold. I expected him to be angry. Instead, he asked one question. Did she tell you? Yes. He was quiet. Then he said, Thank you for listening. I closed my eyes. Harold, I'm sorry. For what? For getting involved in all of this. He laughed softly. Adrian, you knocked on our door when our daughter wouldn't. That sentence stayed with me. Months passed. The wedding was canceled. The venue deposits were dealt with. The invitations never went out. Lauren moved out. Robert and Victoria ended their involvement with her, but they didn't publicly humiliate her. My family didn't either. Nobody needed to. The truth had already done enough. As for Harold and Elaine, they didn't suddenly become a perfect family. Real life doesn't work that way. There were difficult conversations, anger, therapy, silence, then small steps. A phone call, a Sunday visit, a birthday dinner, a photograph, one ordinary moment at a time. Eventually, Lauren started rebuilding her life without pretending it belonged to somebody else. And I started rebuilding mine. Months later, I visited Harold and Elaine. When I walked into their house, Elaine hugged me immediately. Harold stood behind her. He smiled. On the refrigerator was a new photograph. Lauren was standing between them. No designer dress. No carefully curated event. Just jeans. A simple sweater. And the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. I looked at the picture. Elaine noticed. She finally came home. I nodded. Looks like it. Harold smiled. Then he said something I'll never forget. You didn't lose a wife that night. I looked at him. You saved yourself from becoming someone you couldn't respect. Years later, I still think about that dinner. Not the ring. Not the humiliation. Not even the lie. I think about Elaine holding those flowers. I think about Harold extending his hand to my father. Two men from completely different worlds discovering that love had taught them the same lesson. Your worth isn't measured by your house, your job, your clothes, your bank account, or the people you're trying to impress. It's measured by how you treat the people who had nothing to offer you except their love. I thought I was driving north that morning to meet the parents of the woman I was going to marry. Instead, I met two people who reminded me what family was supposed to mean. And I learned something painful. Sometimes the person you love isn't the person you imagined. Sometimes walking away isn't revenge. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in a lie. I never got married that year, but I did get something more important. I got my life back. And somewhere in a modest house outside Detroit, a father and mother finally got something they had stopped believing would ever happen. Their daughter came home. Not because she needed their money. Not because she needed their name. But because, for the first time, she finally understood that she had never needed to become somebody else to deserve their love. And that's the part of the story I'll remember forever. I thought that night was about exposing Lauren. It wasn't. It was about revealing what mattered when everything else disappeared. And when I finally drove away from that house, I realized the most important deal of my life had never been about money. It was about knowing when to walk away from a lie, and when to leave the door open for the truth.